Good afternoon. We welcome you to our Yom Kippur Mincha service, as it were, or now for the second year, a new look at Mincha. This service may be familiar to you. It might not be familiar to you, but it is, from our traditional vantage, our last opportunity to hear words of Torah and Haftarah as we make our way towards Yom Kippur's end. Our Torah portion is found in the Machzor on page 338, Parshat Kedoshim. This central Torah portion in our Torah invites us to consider the command, "You shall be holy," as it is referred to in our tradition as the Holiness Code, offering for us and opening up for us a catalog, as it were, of all of the different ways we, as the Jewish people, Jewish families, and people inspired by Jewish tradition, might bring holiness into our world. We'll speak more about that as a clergy team toward the end of our experience this day, but in the meantime, we turn to Torah. Our Torah reader this day is Talia Polish. We welcome her and turn to, again, page 338.
Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvarach. Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim, V'natan Lanu et Torto. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. Lo ta'asu avo b'mishpat, lo tisa p'nei dal, v'lo tedar b'nei gadol, b'tzedek tishpot amitecha, lo telech rachil be'amecha, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, ani Adonai, lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha, Hocheach tochiach et amitecha, v'lo tisa alav chet. Lo tikom v'lo titor et b'nei amecha, v'havta l'reacha kamocha, ani Adonai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, B'chayei olam notah b'tochenu, Baruch atah Adonai noten HaTorah.
Thank you so much, Talia. That was beautiful. We turn now to our Haftarah designation for Mincha, the story of Jonah. This story that you are likely familiar with from your childhood, perhaps, turns as the final prophetic word we hear at our Yom Kippur observance. And it is one that lets us know that its message is not reserved for children, but should beckon to all of us. The themes elevated in Jonah remind us of our human tendency to run away, a call to elevate ourselves above, to face our fears, the importance of what it means to repent, the importance of what it means to believe in the possibility of repentance of others, and how we might see our universal responsibility to one another as inhabitants of this earth, all of us, God's children. We turn now to the voices who really represent this story here in our congregation, our past president, Judy Gillard-Kitsis, and her daughter, Julie Moss. First, the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim, v'ratza v'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah uv'Moshe avdo, uv'Yisrael amo, uv'nvi'ei ha'emet.
And the word of Adonai came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up, go to that great city of Nineveh, and proclaim against it, for their evil deeds have risen up before me. But Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish, away from the presence of Adonai, and he went down to Jaffa and found there a ship heading for Tarshish, and he paid its fare and went down into it, to head with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of Adonai. But Adonai hurled a great wind upon the sea, a storm at sea so great that the ship was in danger of being shattered to pieces. And the sailors were frightened, cried out, each to his own god, and flung the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten their load. But Jonah had gone down into the hold, the lower deck of the vessel, and he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. And the captain approached him and said to him, "What are you doing sound asleep? Get up, call to your God. Perhaps the God will be kind to us and we will not perish." And they said, each man to his companion, "Let us cast lots, that we might know on whose account this evil event has come to us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. And they said to him, "Tell us who you've brought this evil upon us. What is your trade, and where have you come from? What is your country, and who are your people?" And he said to them, "I am Hebrew. I revere Adonai, God of heaven, who made sea and dry land." The men felt great fear, and they asked him, "What have you done?" Because the men knew he was fleeing from Adonai, for so he had told them. And they asked him, "What should we do to you to bring calm to the sea around us?" For the sea was growing more and more stormy. So he said to them, "Lift me up and hurl me into the sea, and the sea will calm down for you. For I know that this great storm came upon you because of me." And the crew rowed hard to return to the dry land, but they could not do it, for the sea was raging more and more fiercely around them. And they called out to Adonai, saying, "Please, Adonai, please do not let us perish because of the life of this man, and do not hold us guilty of shedding innocent blood. For you, Adonai, that which you desired, you have brought about." And they lifted Jonah and hurled him into the sea. Then the sea stopped raging. The men revered Adonai, great was their reverence. So they offered to Adonai a sacrifice and made vows. And Adonai provided a great fish to swallow, Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah prayed to Adonai his God from the belly of the fish. Adonai commanded the fish, and it spewed Jonah out upon dry land.
And the word of Adonai came to Jonah a second time. "Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh, and call out to the proclamation that I tell you." So Jonah got up and went to Nineveh according to the word of Adonai. Now Nineveh was a great city of God, 3 days' journey across. And Jonah started out and made his way to the city, the distance of a 1-day walk. And he called out and said, 40 more days, and Nineveh shall be overturned." The people of Nineveh trusted in God, and they proclaimed a fast, and they put on sackcloth, from the richest to the poorest. And the word reached the king of Nineveh. And he got up from his throne, took off his robe, put on sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he cried out and said in Nineveh, "By decree of the king and his nobles, no person or beast or flock or herd shall taste anything. They shall not graze, and they shall not drink water. They shall be covered with sackcloth, person and beast, and shall call loudly to God. Let all turn back from their evil ways and from the violence which is in their hands." Who knows? God may turn and relent, turn back from the heat of anger, so that we do not perish. God saw what they did, how they were turning back from their evil ways. And God relented from the evil plan for them and did not carry it out.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'yoseh, hamdaber umkayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek. Ala Torah v'al avodah v'al hanaviim v'al yom ha'kippurim hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu limchila v'lislicha ulchapara lechavod ultifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach umbarachim otach Yitbarach Shimcha b'fi kol chai tamid le'olam va'ed Udvarcha emet v'kayam la'ad Baruch atah Adonai Melech mochel v'soleach La'avonotenu v'la'avonot Amo Beit Yisrael Uma'avir eshmotenu B'chol shana v'shana Melech al kol ha'aretz Mekadesh Yisrael V'yom ha'kippurim. With gratitude to Judy and to Julie, thank you.
Shana Tova, Happy New Year. Gemar Chatima Tova, as we say on Yom Kippur. It is wonderful to be able to join you this afternoon for another look at Mincha, this afternoon experience. You might remember last year we had a conversation among our clergy about our Haftarah section. This year we're going to take a look at our Torah portion. This afternoon, just read by Talia Polish. We thank you, Talia, for helping those words come alive in the way that you did. This portion of Kiddushim, this holiness code, it's actually right at the very heart of our Torah, right at the very center of our text. A conversation or a list of rules and laws and requests for the people of Israel to live holy lives, to be holy. I'm reminded of a quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. So many of us enjoy reading his works each Shabbat. He says, it contains one of the most remarkable of all ideas, that we are summoned to be holy because God is holy. And this is the invitation for us to step into holiness and to step into God's ways and God's paths. There is so much in this portion for us to unpack and for us to look at. And so I know that we're each eager to digest and dissect a few of our favorites. Of course, this text is punctuated throughout with this line, you shall be holy, Ani Adonai Elohechem, because God is holy. Again, an invitation for us to step into the ways of God and to live holy lives. The question for us is, why do we read this portion at the very last moment of Yom Kippur? Right? What should we take away from this text? Let's dive right in. This first section that we can look at is Leviticus 19, verse 9. When you reap the harvest of your field, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, Adonai, am your God.
I'll say something about that. So, these, I guess you would articulate this as two different commandments, one referred to as Peah, usually the other referred to as Leket, but both having to do with, when we have a field, literally, or a space of land in which we grow things that is ours, what our behavior should be when it comes to the understanding of the consumption, the collecting and the consumption of literally the product that has come from our, and I'm using that term suspiciously, land, right? It's our land. Presumably, we planted the stuff into the earth. We tended to it. It grew, produced, and therefore we might understand all of that then equals our right to consume it all. Right? Because it's happening in the confines of that which is ours. And these two different commands, these two different verses, they come and they say, stop. They don't address explicitly the fallacy in that equation, but they break that equation down when they say, hey, you in fact can't harvest all of it. You have to leave some portion of it, Peah, for the poor, for those in need. That gets explicated a little bit sort of more expansively in the book of Deuteronomy and then in rabbinic texts. And then, interestingly enough, the part about the vineyard talks about if gleanings fall or you drop them, those aren't yours either, right? So this instituting of boundary in terms of what one can consume or possess, when we assume it's already ours, is sort of brought to bear, I think, as this paradigmatic example of what differentiates us, or what could differentiate us, I guess if we choose to take it up, as holy. And there's something holy in that idea of not consuming everything that we could. We would think by rights, certainly by civil rights, and leaving it, in fact, for someone else. One of the things, I know you're trying to say something.
No, you got me thinking. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the other things that I'll just say about it, which I think is really fascinating, is the later commentaries go in and they say, in particular when it comes to the corners or the portions that are left untouched by you, the owner, or the that which is dropped either by you or from a vine or growth that happens to end up on the ground, is that the minute that happens, it is no longer yours. It is, in fact, the property of the needy. It's theirs now. And if you go back and take it, you're stealing from them. So this incredible kind of like transfer of how we understand what is ours is at play. And I think it's because, and we can guess this, ultimately none of this is ours. All of it's God. It's just on lease. All of it belongs to God, given to us, or we leased it maybe from God, something like that. It's just a really interesting way to think, I think, differently about what is ours, what we are entitled to. It's certainly countercultural to, I think, our way of seeing things in life today. Sorry for
No,
cutting
that's
you
where I was
off.
going to go. No, you didn't cut me off. I mean, is that the land's not ours anyway. As we read later in Leviticus, it's just on loan. We've got to, when we get to the sabbatical and the Jubilee year, we've got to turn it back. And there's that reminder that stays with us, that commandment that stays with us, right? That in everything we do, there's that piece of recognizing those who are in need. So there's two parts there.
And on top of that, the Mishnah Peah talks about this whole notion of that there, you have to do that and more because there is no limit prescribed. So and it's so it's elu devarim lahem shiur. It's all, and it's not just the corners of the field. It's many other mitzvot where we're told, you have to do it, and you don't stop doing it because there is no limit, and the corners of the field are a part of that category. And what a beautiful notion for us to think about holiness being doing more. That you can't do enough, so you do more. I mean, it's fascinating for this time of year and for this day, all the more important.
And it's accessible, right? That if we've all been to an apple orchard, you look on the ground, there are apples on the ground, right? In every single farm and every single orchard. This is something that people know. You know this experience, and you know that those are the fruits for those who are in need.
And it's probably worth sort of just naming, like this section of commandment is really the root for all of the tzedakah sort of construct that we have in our modern world. Not every one of us has a field. Not every one of us, is agriculturally aligned. But we are commanded to give a certain percentage of our earnings for tzedakah, a minimum 10% traditionally, and all of that roots back to this. I'm also reminded, and it's something when I learned it that really struck me was, when we think about probably what we would call ultra-Orthodox Jews who have payas on the corners of their head, we think of that, I won't say we, I will sometimes think of that in a way that means, they're very, very religious. But that word payas is the same as peah, and it's actually there so that in front of their face, literally at all times, is this reminder of this specific mitzvah. That nothing actually is solely yours, and you have an obligation to see yourself as a part of a community that shares in what is yours, has their portion in what is yours. It's this incredible equalizing notion. And it's in like giving away, if we think of it that way, whatever by rights would have been ours, that we access this holiness thing. So we're told in, contemporary culture, you are great when you have more. Judaism comes and says, you are great when you give more.
It's humility. I mean, there's a forced humility and a reminder that lest we get arrogant and that we did this all. I mean, you see that in the first fruits offering when our ancestors entered the land, right? Go before the priest in the set place, bring your offering, and give to those in need. Right, it's right there. So the reminder to us at every holiday and every simcha, there's more than one Jewish organization. I think about when I first learned about Mazon, the Jewish organization of feeding the hungry, like their tagline used to be was X% of all simchas. I don't know if that's still their tagline, but the idea that even when we're celebrating and we're lifting it all up, don't forget everyone around you.
And it's supposed to be the best of yours.
Yes,
Right, yeah.
right. Don't give
Right.
the trash, which is
Right.
interesting in terms of what drops, by the way.
Totally. Yep. Yeah.
And how countercultural it is, right? What's mine is mine.
Yeah.
What I earned is mine. Judaism says, not so fast. Let's look at some other text. Leviticus 19:13, right? So we move now from rights of the poor to commerce practices, right? And I'll read a small section and let's play with it a little bit. You shall not defraud your fellow, and in this sense, it's Israelite. You shall not commit robbery. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning, right? The wages of the laborer shall not remain with you until morning. And this is one that, as we've spoken leading up to this moment, we've addressed in depth and detail. Where is it sitting with you now?
Well, so this is a fabulous passage. It's, as far as I'm concerned, this notion of treating other people well and rightly, and the text continues with this whole connection that we see linked here in verse 15, and then again in 35 with lo ta'asu avel b'mishpat, where you're not supposed to do unjustly. You're not supposed to make unjust rulings or decisions. And one has to do with the fellow neighbor, and the other has to do with the measures. And both of these, when you put them together, it gives us such a wonderful way of looking at the holy days and our sort of approach to atonement and to God. We have this sense of, the individual aspect of it, what our job is as an individual and how it affects us individually. But then there's also the corporate responsibility and how it affects the entire group and all of us. So, whereas the commentary that talks about how if you pervert justice, you are defiling the land. You are profaning the name of God. You are keeping the Shekhinah's presence away. You are making it impossible for Am Yisrael to be on the land promised to them. I mean, wow, those are such big punishments. And then on top of it, when you think about, well, why was this lo ta'asu avel b'mishpat repeated? Why was it in verse 15 and then repeated again in 35, and that it's this whole notion of when you pervert justice in the way of measurements, you're doing so in a way where you're not always sure who's affected, so you can't then go through the process of teshuvah. And here we are, at the very end of Yom Kippur, where we're hoping to reach this, at one with moment with God. But if we've, perpetrated something that was defrauding someone and we didn't even know who it was, we can't have gone through the process. So it's both for the present time, but also for the future, something to avoid, not just in advance, but in the future because of that.
And I love what you said about corporate responsibility. It's such a, I don't know that you probably intended the double entendre there, but, I think a lot of times when we in normal life think of corporate responsibility, we don't necessarily understand that within the realm of our religious identity, right? And corporate responsibility at its heart, if you pull the word apart, is collective responsibility with collective consequence. And when we have agency to be incorporated, I guess, if I'm playing the word out, right? Whether it's being fair with weights and measures, or whether it's I divvy out paychecks and I can decide whether to keep them in my bank account for one more day so I earn the interest, or give them out at the time I've promised to give them out so no one else is left in a tenuous position. That's the whole point, I think, of not leaving, not waiting to pay your workers until the next morning, because they might need that money then.
Exactly. Unless they were working past sundown, there's no provision to
Right.
delay. You're
they
not allowed
need their
to.
paycheck.
Yeah.
And there's a consequence on a corporate level when we do that and when we don't do that. And it's not about the bottom line on our earnings sheet. right? Like, we're functioning with a different earnings sheet.
It's about the
like
bottom
it's
line.
a balance
It's-
sheet.
it's
Right,
a
that's what
different
I'm
balance
saying, though.
sheet.
It's not in the realm of, our P&L.
Right.
It's in the realm of
Our
our
soul.
ultimate, like our soul's P&L, as it were, So it's just, it's an interesting thing. It's just an interesting thing to think of, these places where we often separate, we set a boundary and say, well, this is our spiritual life and this is our, business life, occupational life, and
They're inextricably tied to one another.
Yeah.
If we let them to be. I mean, when we don't is where often where there are problems, because we can say we have a strong moral compass and then we do something different. When we acknowledge that there's a bee by you, there's the strong linkage. And that corporate notion is, that's what Torah is all about, right? The sense of the individual is later.
Right.
It's so much later. And we live in a world that is about the individual, and we have to sometimes remind ourselves to go back. So this is like, we're all part of it. Like, we have the responsibility for the person's wages. Just like you're not supposed to take someone's garment. If they make a pledge and you take their garment, you're not supposed to keep it overnight. Even if they owe you something, that's their collateral, give it back. They might be cold at night. We have that. We're all interconnected with that old New York telephone commercial. We're all connected, New York telephone. But we are. And so all of our actions impact the other.
You've talked about this or in the street level of things, right? That when we're going to our dry cleaner or when we're compensating people that work for us, whether that's childcare or others, right? That this is at play as well.
We've had powerful conversations within our NSCI community. People who said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't pay that person who worked at my house on time because I hadn't gone to the bank, and I should do that." Or conversations I've had with people who got stiffed by employers who didn't really think about what they're in the shoes. And it's big. It's really big.
And it's interesting, something I haven't connected to this before, but now that you just said it that way, in some respects, it isn't any different than Peah and Leket, right? Like, once the wages are earned, the money is no longer ours.
It's like on the ground.
It's on the ground. And it actually belongs to the wage earner.
That's a nice connection.
Right?
It's a really nice connection.
And it's all, in my mind, all of these things are about, like, equalizing power inequities, right? Like, it might start out that we think, well, I have and you don't, but the overarching system is, through trying to attain holiness, we equalize, we give of a bit of our agency so that another could have agency in and of themselves. It's not a pity party and it's not a handout. It belongs to them.
But that's the whole thing about the perversion of justice.
Right.
Yes. Justice is always supposed to be blind.
Yep.
It's supposed to not take into account, whether you're the wage payer or the wage earner. You're both equal, and you both deserve the same treatment. Either way, and so it's all tied in together.
Well, and it all ties back to Genesis. If we're all created in God's image, then whatever my power, if I'm the employer and you're the employee or vice versa, we shouldn't be any different. And just because maybe it's obvious, but maybe it's not, that idea of being an employer or a farmer maybe feel really far from many of us on the North Shore of Chicago, but we're all there.
Yeah.
We're all, whether we're paying wages to somebody or we have food on our tables and we're end-to-end, we're in that position of responsibility. We're not absolved from it. To go, I don't have a field, I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah. Let's go on to one of our favorites. Right, so this holiness code also contains the golden rule, right? To love our neighbors as ourselves. I'll read what Leviticus offers us. And I'm going to read two different verses that speak to each other. Mm-hmm. First is Leviticus 19:18. Right, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow Israelite as yourself. I am Adonai. And really quickly, soon after, almost the same breath, we're reminded in 34, the strangers who reside with you shall be to you as your citizens. You shall love each one as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I, Adonai, am your God.
So much there. You referenced the golden rule, which is fascinating because that's actually not even our term.
Right.
That comes in.
Right.
Some of you may recall I gave a sermon last spring after guest teaching with a friend of mine who teaches business ethics, spiritual ethics at the business school at Notre Dame, and we talked about this. The Jewish Christian heritage. Oh gosh, I almost hit a bee.
Sorry.
No,
Sorry.
no, thank you for not letting me get stung. That would have been bad. First off, that reminder that we're all strangers in Egypt. I mean, what is that, 36 times in Torah? It's the most prevalent reminder in Torah. So what does that have to do? It's got to inform our behavior. It's not like, oh, we were strangers in Egypt, we should punish the next person. Like, Daka, to the contrary, we need to do something that informs our behavior. The love your neighbor as yourself, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, is really interesting because we go to Talmud, right? It's given in the opposite form. There's that old great Hillel Shammai story. The proselyte comes to Shammai and says, "Tell me the whole Torah while standing on one foot." And Shammai's like, "Yeah." And Hillel says, "Do not do unto others what is hateful to you," and does it while standing on one foot. So, and it says that is the heart or the essence of Torah. So we're supposed to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, which goes to everything else we've spoken about. And Ibn Ezra and Sforno and later commentaries say, like, literally, like, put your mind in their minds, put yourself physically there. Don't just be like, I don't like that. Like, what would it feel like? And gosh, to do that and look at it from both ways, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, but don't do what's hateful. Not just like personally, like, I don't like a particular food, don't serve it to someone, but in a big realm of like, that's going to be evil, then don't do it to someone else. It really challenges us from the positive and the negative vantage.
And it's sometimes easier to act that way, to show real empathy for people who look like you or live near you or act like you or are like you in some ways. In 34, the challenge is remember all those other people too.
Right, and the commentators lift that up. They don't limit it to our people. They're saying look to the other people. Other people being, I don't mean other as in other, but as in not your immediate, the people who look like you or have your faith and things like that. They're saying very clearly, put yourselves in the shoes of the person who is also the stranger.
I like how there's sort of this trajectory of expansion from 1918, where we get love your neighbor as yourself, and then we go to 34 where we get to love the stranger. At best we can know and understand who we are, what we like, what we don't like, what we love, what we hate, and we might have a greater access to that or a greater ease to that. We should conceptually be able to apply that to the people we are familiar with, to those in the closest circle around us. And in some respects, that's sort of like a building practice to then get you to that outer circle of, and then also to the stranger, to the one you don't see yourself in necessarily. But it says to you, see yourself in them. There's this refusal to abandon one's relationship to themselves in how they relate to and treat an other, when society would message to us, I think probably from a Jewish vantage, all sorts of false constructs. These are strangers. These are poor people. These are X. We are Y. These are narratives we build, and holiness is seeking to blur those lines a bit.
Well, and we see that in other places in our tradition. I mean, we see it in the commandments for giving tzedakah. I think it's in Maimonides. I may have my source wrong. Where you start with your own community, and then you go to those who are not the Jews in your community. You go beyond and look at the commandment for peace. It's different, but it's like seek peace and pursue it. The commentators are amazing with that. Like start at home and then run after it in the world. So we're responsible in both places.
And the notion that we start here, we start with ourselves and then build out. When you think about how, there are certain things in each one's life that come easily. And the things that come easily, you don't really think much about how they're happening or why they're happening. It's the things that are difficult that require, and I think you used this word earlier, practice. Yeah. And I think the text is urging us to build a practice around taking what we know for ourselves and what we believe for ourselves and extending it well beyond ourselves into each concentric circle that we are a part of, whether it's our family or then our tight-knit community and our broader community and then out to the world. And without that practice, we'll never get really beyond ourselves, and we have to, and which is again tied into the earlier texts that we've already talked about, with perversion of justice, or or the other, the peah. I mean, it's all related, which is so beautiful when you think about it, how they're all intertwined with one another, and they all require our attention and our practice.
And just sort of like bringing it back to where we began, it's interesting that the overarching command at the beginning of Kedoshim is, you shall be holy, which is a state of being, but the vehicle to achieve the state of being, it's not like just like, oh, well, you're Jewish, so you're holy. It's not you're the chosen people thing, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. It's that in order to be holy, you must do. And these do's, these activities, as they were, are not once a year activities. They're regular. So they they throw the opportunity for practice in your face all the time. Right? There's no way if you're a person who's planting, you're harvesting too. It's not happening once a year. It's happening on a regular basis. If you're a person who pays out to other people, you're doing that on a regular basis. Like these are somewhat ubiquitous, right, in our existence. And so it's kind of like built in a pedagogy that invites that sort of practice.
Well, we repeat it daily. Yes. It's part of the Shema
Exactly.
that we do this. We do this to demonstrate the love. And what's the love? It's the action. It's the mitzvot. It's the linking ourselves to that gift that was given. And so we get this repetition, which is, when you think about it, it's such a great educational tool that we know works. Right. It's that daily repetition and reminder of what to do, and then you got to do it, because without doing it, it's meaningless.
And you've got to do it across. I mean, we've looked at excerpts of this portion, but if you look at the entirety of the portion, it's in the personal realm, it's in the communal realm, it's in the spiritual realm. It ethical business practices, like it crosses all. It's a great how-to list. How to be holy. What's that?
The fundamentals of who we need to be as Jewish people as we start a brand new year. But I think we read it every day in the Shema and every year on Yom Kippur because it's an acknowledgement that this stuff is hard.
Oh yeah.
Right? And it requires us to check all of those boxes and to really assess, as we're doing the cheshbon nefesh and the accounting of our souls, am I doing this? Am I doing this to the extent that I'm capable and able?
Right. That's interesting. So I've never, and this kind of goes back to that question you began with, but like, why do we read this as the last word from Torah, right? And in some respects, one could look at Kedoshim as cheshbon hanefesh, like our last chance to go back, and because it is a list,
it is. It is a checklist.
Did I do this? Did I do this? Did I hold the wages or not? Did I? It's kind of like the last chance to do that. And because it's Yom Kippur and we're already in the new year, it also is this future visioning thing. Right. Okay,
here are my goals.
Assuming I make it to Ne'ilah, right? Like I'm gonna enter into this new year just fine, and here's in my hand what I can bring with me. And it's like at that sweet spot of holding the past, the present, and the future, all in this kind of final word, which is really cool.
And a reminder that, I don't know that it's, maybe the reminder's there or I'm taking the reminder, but we're not all there yet. I mean, it's not, you're not automatically holy, right? These are our goals for the new year, as well as our tools for evaluating the year that ended. There's a reminder of humility, because we're not doing all of them the way we should. I mean, let's be honest. We can try as hard as we are, but we can always do them better. And there's that statement of humility and a reminder, like, go forward and try to be holy. We're still trying to get there.
Well, if the bar wasn't high, then it probably wouldn't be worth jumping over. So.
Right. I'd like to see you jump over the bar. I'm going to skip jumping. I'm just going to work on my checklist.
To walk in God's ways doesn't mean perfection, right? God becomes angry. God is spiteful. God exhibits a lot of these behaviors that we might want to not exhibit ourselves. But it's a process. We'll remind ourselves day in and day out and every single year on this day.
Well, we get it another time too, because we get the Kedoshim that comes up during the year, so we get a choice.
Yeah, about
About
6
halfway,
months.
right? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what's
that's really
interesting.
interesting.
It arrives at pretty much the sweetest spot it could, when
Yeah.
the memory would be the most distant.
A booster.
A booster.
Well, and it
A booster.
Oh, nice. And it connects, if you think about via Hafta, like the how-to list in there. How do we love God? I mean, they're
All
different,
of
but
it,
they're all
yeah.
linked. Our reminders are all over.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I know that all of us would invite your questions and your comments as you email or call or speak with us throughout the year. This conversation doesn't end here at this table. In fact, we didn't open it yet to the congregation. It's us sitting here. And so please do join in, share your questions, and be a part of this as we explore what it means to live a Jewish life of holiness in this new year, 5782. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for learning. Thanks for studying. Another thank you to Talia Polish, to Judy Gillard-Kitsis, and to Judy Gillard-Kitsis and Julie Moss for offering words of Haftarah this holiday. We hope you'll stay with us for the conclusion of Yom Kippur. Thanks for joining us. Shana Tova.
Shana
Shana
Tova.
Tova.
Not too bad.